Hello, welcome back to Reads of an Apple. My name is Stacy, and today I'm here to do another book tag. I feel like it's been a little bit since I've done one. And I'm going to do something kind of different today. So I saw this going around quite a while ago on Bookstagram and BookTube and different book blogs and stuff, and I thought now would be a fun time to do it. So today I'm going to give you a book recommendations based on my name. Now, specifically for this version, I am doing titles for each letter in my name. And when I was compiling my list, I did try to pick books that it's been a while since I've read them before I was active in any bookish social media. Not all of them are going to be like so, but a lot of them are going to be, so it's been a little bit since I've read some of them. And not all of them I ended up having in paperback, which is unfortunate. All of these I gave 5 stars when I read them, but like I said, some of them it's definitely been a while since I've read them, so my taste could have potentially changed. But I decided to do my full name just so I can get more recs out at you. And if you weren't aware, my real name is Anastasia. I just go by Stacy. So we're going to be doing Anastasia Apple. So a lot of A's. Alrighty, so let's just get into it. So we're going to start off with A, and my first A is going to be All Geek to Me by Allie York. This is the first book in her Words for Nerds series, and this is actually a book that I've read in the past couple years. But I loved this series. Like, I knew this had to be one of my A's, and I caved a little bit on my stipulations just because I knew I had so many A's in my name. And I just love this. So this is a series of novellas available on KU, and it's the Words for Nerds series, and it's about a group of girls that own a comic book store, and each book and each of the 4 main girls has like their own nerds, and they're into nerdy things like board games, role-playing games, video games, comics, Marvel, DC, all that stuff. But each of them has their own like specific niche, and while they are across the board, like they have their specific niche. In this first book, her niche is definitely more comics, and she's really into cosplaying, and so she does a lot of like full-on cosplaying, and then kind of similar to like what people do when they go to Disney. I think they call it bounding, where you dress in normal clothes, but it's reminiscent of Disney characters, but she does that with like comic book characters mostly, but then other geeky characters as well. So I loved it. I highly recommend it if you are a nerd like myself. It's just so much fun, and I could see myself going to the store. I mean, the stuff that they get into, the way that they have conversations reminded me of me and my friends, and yeah, I loved this whole series. But this is the first book in the series, so I thought that would be a good way to kind of put you into starting the series. And then let's move on to letter N. So now we're jumping back into books that I have previously read. And for N, I decided to go with Not Another Vampire Book by Cassandra Gannon. And this is Not Another Vampire book number 1. It is a duology, but they're different people. And it's been a while since I read this, but I thought this was super fun. It definitely has a humor that I feel like could turn other people off, but this is... I can't remember what her job is, if she's an editor or if she's just reading a book, but she's reading this ridiculous fantasy vampire romance, and she's just like, this is completely silly. This storyline makes no sense, and she ends up somehow falling into the book, and it's an alternate dimension, and the person who was writing this, I think, ends up being somebody who was in this world. But so when she arrives in this world, she breaks up the marriage between the princess and the hero in the story. The hero falls in love with her. And so she's trying, but because the book is going off plot, the world's like coming to an end or something crazy. So she ends up teaming up with the villain vampire to help get the book like back on plot, and it's her romance with the villain. And I thought it was super fun. The second book, if I remember correctly, is the hero character somehow falling through the same portal into like our world, the real world, and his romance was just like a normal person. So I enjoyed them. I thought they were super fun, crazy, wacky. I don't remember how I found these, but I gave it 5 stars when I read it, and I kind of want to reread it now. Okay, back to another A. I had to do a Nalini Singh on this list somewhere, and so I went with Angel's Blood. This is the first book in her Archangel series. I am nowhere near caught up in this series, but I loved this first book. I started this series after her Changeling series, but the series is just so good, and I love the way the angels are portrayed here. They're a little more darker, they're a little more grittier, and I mean, if you haven't read Nalini Singh, I highly recommend her. I know she is a darling of people who read romance, but if you haven't tried her Archangel series, I definitely recommend the first few books. This is one where this is Michael and I can't remember, maybe Selena or something like that. I can't remember the heroine's name. But so they are like the main couple, but we do get books that are about other couples, but we get quite a few books that is their storyline. Hi. And I really loved it. I'm getting yelled at. Okay, so now we are to S. And this one I have in paperback. The Secret History of the Pink Carnation. This is the first book in Lauren Willig's Pink Carnation series. I feel like this series is not talked about enough. I feel like she writes a lot of historical fiction. These ones are definitely more a romance. However, I feel like her publisher or her PR company let her down. This was mainly marketed to as Christian fiction, like Christian historical fiction. From what I remember, there is a little bit of steam. I wouldn't say these are completely clean or closed. Maybe they're more closed door or fade to black. But I feel like we do get some steamy scenes. This book. I remember finding this book back when Borders was around. And a friend and I were like, let's go to Borders after class when we were in college. And we were just wandering around Borders, and I saw this book, and I went, ooh, I haven't read historical romance in a while, because I didn't take very many historical romances with me when I went to college. I mostly took my paranormal romances, and I was like, let me try it, and I became obsessed. I have a couple of these books in paperback. Most of them I have in hardback, but I found this book and I loved it. What I think is super duper fun about this series is this first book kind of sets up, but it has dual storylines. So we have the historical era, let's see if it says how far back it is. It does not say in the beginning, but so this is set in both in the history and in present day. So what we have is I think her name's Eloise. Yeah, Eloise. She is working on her doctoral thesis, and she's writing her paper on think pink Ganation or purple Ganation, pink Carnation, the Scarlet Pimpernel, flowery spies from I think it was the Napoleonic is when they were super popular. And so she wants to do her thesis on the Pink Carnation, who there's very little information about. And somehow she comes across the family that's supposed to be descended from this. And the grandmother character, who's like the matriarch of the family, allows Eloise access. And so we hear the stories of the Pink Carnation, and the Pink Carnation is the first book, and then every book centers around a different couple historically and like their group of spy friends. And at the same time, it's interspersed with a romance between Eloise and the matriarch of the descendant of the Pink Carnation, and her grandson. I think it's her grandson. So we get their romance throughout the entire series. And it's just, I just love them. It's been a while since I've read them. I'm not a big fan of just straight historical fiction, but almost all of the historical fictions that I've read have come from Lauren Willig, because I'm just such a big fan of her writing. And this is another series I really want to reread. I think it's highly underrated. I think it's so much fun. I love the dual timeline storylines, and I don't know, it's just super fun. And then we have this fun little plot line where she's trying to think if the grandson is like carrying on his family's name and is also a spy, but maybe he's not a spy. So it's like this, I don't know, they're just so much fun. And I can't recommend this series more. And almost every single book in this series gave a 5-star. And the couple that I didn't give a 5-star to, I gave a 4-star. So very highly rated series for me, and I love them to pieces. Okay. So then we come to T. So I'm going to choose Tangled Up in Love. And this is by Heidi Betts. And this is the first book with her Chicks with Sticks series. And this is a group, this is a trilogy, I believe, of 3 girls who are knitters, and they're good friends, and they're in the same like knitting group. And this first one is, the heroine is like a newspaper writer, a journalist of some sort. And she has this rivalry going with a journalist who does mostly like men's magazines, but it's kind of like known in their town that they have like competing articles, and they kind of secretly, not so secretly, bash each other in these other articles. And what he's kind of been into her, and she just thinks he hates her, and he took a job out from under her or something like that. But she dares him to learn how to knit, and we get him coming to her knitting store and coming to her knitting group and almost kind of forcing her to teach him to knit so that they spend time together. And it's their romance. I enjoyed the full trilogy. The second book is a little more angsty, I think. The other 2 books I feel like are second chance romances. One of them I think is, I can't remember if their marriage is ending and they rescue it, or if they've gotten divorced and it's them reconnecting. And then the other one is like a news anchor or like a famous girl on TV that does like news or local show kind of a thing, and a hockey player. And that one, there's this big whole blow up where she walks in on him seemingly sleeping with another person. And so that one is then a very grovelly, angsty book. But I enjoyed most of the trilogy, but I really enjoyed this first one. So, and this is contemporary romance, if you couldn't tell. And I thought it was super fun. And if you're into like yarn crafts like me, this was, I always get disappointed because there's so many like knitting, like not a lot, but there are like more knitting based books and like knitting group based books, but I'm a crocheter and so I need more crochet books. And yeah, so I had to go with knitting because it was the closest I could get to. Okay, moving on to another A, and I'm going to go with Any Rogue Will Do by Bethany Bennett. This is her debut book. This is her first book in the Misfits of Mayfair series. The second book is my favorite in the series, but that one starts with a W, and I don't have a W in my name, so I went with this one. It's just so much fun. I love this series. I don't know what Bethany Bennett is writing next. This trilogy is her, this is her debut book. She has the 2 other books. I don't know what's coming next from her. I would like to know, but whatever she writes, I will read. I'm a big fan of this series. I gave all 3 books 5 stars. Like I said, the second book is my favorite. You've probably heard me talk about it before. It was my favorite historical romance, I want to say, of 2021. Maybe 2022. I can't remember. It's one of them. But yeah, this one is Lady Charlotte and Ethan, and he is Scottish, and they used to be friends, and then their situation arises where they're not friends anymore, and it's their reconnection and romance, and I love it. Okay, on to another S. I had to give it to Simply Irresistible by Jill Shalvis. I am a Jill Shalvis fangirl. She is one of my original contemporary authors. This is the first book I ever got from her. I got this for Christmas the year it came out from my mom, and it started me down this Jill Shalvis rabbit hole. This is the first book in her Lucky Harbor series. I love it. I wasn't a big contemporary person. This book almost single-handedly got me into contemporary and Jill Shalvis in general. I've read so many of her books. I've read a lot of her older Harlequin and silhouette romances. In more recent years, she's kind of gotten more into the women's fiction than the romance, but her latest series is supposed to be a return to romance. I haven't read it yet, but she's an auto-buy author to me, whether I read the book or not. I love Jill Shalvis, and people talk about how her books aren't very steamy, but I reread the first couple books in this series recently, including this one, and I knew she wasn't full steam, but this book was a lot steamier than I remember. I think some of her books are lighter on the steam, but I think that's her newer ones that people are talking about, or maybe her women's fiction books. But this series has some steam to it, has some good tension. I love Jill Shalvis. So yeah, I feel like she's also an author I don't see talked a lot very often, and I don't know if just because she's kind of been around, so people think that she's still popular, and then because she did get away from romance for a little bit. But this series, I highly recommend. The series that she followed this up with, Heartbreaker Bay, another amazing romance series. She has some older ones, Cedar Ridge, that's a trilogy. There's the Animal Attraction, which is small town with vet/animal rescue people. I love those series. So, Jill Shalvis has a huge backlist, and eventually I hope to get caught up on her backlist. But I can't recommend her more enough, especially if you love small town contemporary romances. Okay. My goodness, she is just full of it. We are to I. And I'm going to go with Ice Blue by Anne Stewart. This is the 3rd book in her Ice series. This is actually the first book I ever read by Anne Stewart, surprisingly. And I love this book. I have always been into Japan. I was always interested in the culture and taking classes. I studied abroad in Japan. And my mom ended up buying me this book because she saw it somewhere or it was recommended to her. My mom did so much more research than me and buying me new books when I was in high school. And this is one that she got me. And this is Summer and Takahashi. Yeah, Takahashi's book. And this is a romantic suspense. The entire series is romantic suspense. He is with a secret, think CIA MI6, but they're not country-based. They kind of go everywhere, but they're special agent people. And he is half Japanese, and Summer works at a museum and ends up getting some heirloom type item from her Japanese nanny that she grew up with. And so because she grew up with a Japanese nanny, she learned a lot about the culture and the art. And so she works a lot with the art at the museum that she works at. And a cultist dude is looking for this heirloom because it has some special meaning to the religion that he's kind of put forth. And so he's after her, and Takahashi ends up kind of seducing-ish her to get the information from her. And then he realizes that she doesn't really know that she has this information. She's just like, she doesn't understand anything. She just thinks she has pretty things from her nanny, who has since passed away, that she was really close to. And, you know, he kind of kidnaps her for her protection. And then, I mean, it's a romantic suspense. So then the bad guy captures her, and then Takahashi rescues her, but it's their romance, and I loved it. The book after this, the fourth book, is with his cousin that we meet in this, and his romance with Summer's little sister, but I was here for it. And then, of course, after I read those two, I had to go back and reread the series, and it's so much fun. And this was back in my romantic suspense days, and it's been a while since I've been there, but this is still one of my favorites. Like some of these other books, I really want to reread it now. It's been a while. I can't tell you how many times I've read this book. This used to be one of my go-to rereads, and I'm so happy that I was able to find this book, and I did not lose it, because I am missing some books that were in the storage unit. But we're not going to get into that. Okay, and then the final A for Anastasia is I'm going to do Atlantis Rising by Alyssa Day. This is the first book in her Warriors of Poseidon series. I actually believe I saw in her newsletter that she's gotten the rights back to these books, so I think they're now available in Kindle Unlimited, which is fun. And this is paranormal. This is a weird one. So for me, vampires are paranormal, but these are like vampires with Poseidon, and so usually if mythology is involved in that sense, I consider it more fantasy. So this is one of those that kind of blurs the line, but we've got warriors from Poseidon who live underneath the sea. These are a little suspensey, so it's like a paranormal romantic suspense. And they find the first book is he's up top trying to track down something. I can't remember if it's like a weapon or something like that, but he ends up coming across his fated mate, and she comes down and she kind of helps modernize Atlantis, which is super fun. And, you know, then we get a lot of the warriors getting their HEAs because they're finding their human mates. And I have not finished this series. I think I have the last one or two books to go, because when I love a series, it's hard for me to finish it because I don't want it to be over. So I think a reread is in order for most of these books. But I'd like to finish this series for sure, especially now that they're in KU, because what better time? So there's Anastasia. Let's move on to Apple. So the first book I have in our final A is going to be Asterion. So look at just him. This is the bind up of the first portion. There's two because there's 7 books in this series. But Asterion is a more recent read for me. It was the first book I read by Alessa Thorn. It was her debut book. It's the first book in the Court of the Underworld. And I was obsessed with it. It's a Greek myth retelling with Asterion, as you can tell, who's the Minotaur. And I love this series. This bind up is Asterion, Medusa, Hermes, and Hades, of course. And then the other 3 books in the series are Therion. It's the 3 other death people that are with Hades. Therion. I don't know. I'm spacing on their names. I wonder if they're in the front. Hold that thought. It's driving me nuts that I can't think of their names. Let's see if it's in the back Here we go. Thanatos, Karen, and Erebus. See, I wanted to say Erebus, but then I was like, I think I'm wrong. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Court of the Underworld. I'm a big fan of Alessa Thorn. I still haven't read the spinoff of this series, which is Gods of the Duat, which is a trilogy that are Egyptian gods. So I had to put Asterion on here because it started me down my love for Alessa Thorn. She's on KU. And let me tell you, if you like Alessa Thorn, you're in for a wild ride. She is so chaotic. She tends to get too excited, and if a book's done, it doesn't matter if the release date is 2 weeks, 2 days, or 2 months in advance. She's dropping it when it's ready. She just recently finally announced the secret project she's been like hinting at us about, and just was like, oh, hey, by the way, I wrote a new trilogy of the uncles of the boys in the Wrath of the Fae universe, the 3 princes. And then, oh, by the way, book 1's out. Here you go. And I just saw she finished writing book 2, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, she has so much stuff. I know she has more plans to spin off in the gods universe. She was gonna do Roman goddesses or something like that. And I will read anything Alyssa writes, and you're in for a bumpy ride because she's definitely chaotic and she will definitely spoil you as a reader. But yeah, I can't recommend her enough. And she's also very conscious about, like, she didn't want to do paperbacks at first, but so many people were like, we want your paperbacks. And so she's very environmentally minded. So she ended up just kind of going with bind-ups because that's less overall than doing a physical book for every single one of her books. So if you do want her books in physical, they come in bind-ups. Most of them are in a bind-up of a series, except for Court of the Underworld, because this one has 7 books, so it's in 2 volumes. But everything else is like 3 to 4 books long, and so they're all in one collection, which I would like to eventually have all of them. I just have 2 of them right now. Okay, so that was A. On to our first P in Apple. And I was kind of slightly-ish nervous about this book, putting it out there, but I really love this book, and I didn't talk about it very much when I read it because shortly after some things happened in the world that made me kind of feel weird about talking about this book, but I'm going to mention it now. Pairing Off by Elizabeth Harmon. This is a figure skating romance book. I loved it. It is a more recent read for me. But like I said, I haven't talked about it very much because the series name is Red Hot Russians. And very shortly after I read this book, Russia started a new war. So I felt weird talking about it because it's called The Red Hot Russians. And at least one of the main characters in each of the books in this series are Russian. It's not written by a Russian author. It's written by an American author. Russia just has powerhouse figure skating. Like, it's just kind of one of their things that they do. So that's why I haven't talked about it too much, but I love this. This was given to me, or kind of blurbed to me, as like a Russian steamy take on The Cutting Edge. I would not quite say that, but I will say this is a very good, one of the best representations of figure skating I have ever read. I'm a huge figure skating fan and hockey fan, but I thought this was so realistically done. And then when I saw in the author notes afterwards, Elizabeth was a figure skater herself up through, I think, like high school or college or something like that. So she definitely knows, what kind of goes on in that. And I just thought this was so much fun. So basic premise of this, since I do remember it because it has been in the last couple of years since I've read this, our heroine is a part of a pairs team, and her partner ends up being found out to be sleeping with one of the world's championship judges. And so their title is struck, is taken away from them. It's a big whole scandal. Her and her partner are kind of run out of the figure skating business, and her partner definitely plays up the scandal and uses that to keep him kind of in the spotlight, and she doesn't want anything to do with it. She was the wronged party. she had nothing to do with the relationship. She didn't know about the relationship. And now her figure skating career has been pretty much ruined because of him. And she ends up getting an invitation to come to Russia and join this older Russian figure skater who's, he's also a pair skater. And his partner had decided to switch males because she wanted the best chance at winning gold. And so she went with a better figure skater in Russia because his partner ended up like breaking a bone or something like that and wasn't able to compete. So she switched partners, and so they were looking for a partner for him to just kind of finish out the season and that World Cup circuit. And they end up falling in love. So we get fish out of water. She is thrown in Russia. She doesn't know Russian at all. And we've got some situations with her father's a senator, and there's some kind of weird stuff going on with her mother who's passed away and her not really ever dealing with that grief. And then the grief over losing what she thought was the loss of her career, and then making this comeback with this Russian, which is kind of a thing a little bit because her father's a senator. So now there's weird Russian ties, even though he has nothing to do with it. He didn't even know his daughter was getting invited to go to Russia, kind of situation. I just really loved it. It was just so well done. I have not read more in the series because I got kind of weirded out with the whole Russia thing, but I do, and I saw the second book was with a Russian figure skater, but they're like going on to a reality show, and so it's him, so it's not like set in the figure skating world. He just is a figure skater that we met in this book doing some weird romance reality show. If I remember correctly, it's like a romantic, an engaged couple goes on this reality show, and then think like Love Island kind of Bachelor in Paradise situation where then other people are in there, and it's like testing the bonds of their engagement or something like that. And so she ends up falling with one of the guys they brought on the show after her fiance like dumps her or whatever. So I haven't read it yet, but I'm definitely intrigued with it. So moving on, and speaking of reality shows, I had to go with Playing Games by Jessica Clare. This is the second book in her Games series. And this series, every single book is a romance set around a reality show. This one is Amazing Race. And this is a brother and sister team, and they get paired up with another, and they end up being on the same Amazing Race situation with a rock star, and I can't remember who he's with, but her brother ends up kind of forcing her to switch partners. So she ends up paired with this rock star, and it's their romance, and they're doing Amazing Race. And I was super into Amazing Race when I read this series. I know that there's like a Survivor book. There's a Bachelor book, which was kind of funky. But yeah, if you like reality shows and reality show based romances, definitely check out this series. I love this book. I give quite a few of these books 5 stars just for the fun. Okay, almost done. Elle, I had to give it 2. I just had to. I just had to give it 2. Love in the Afternoon. Lisa Kleypas. This is my favorite Lisa Kleypas that I've read so far. It's been my favorite for a while. This is the 5th book in her Hathaway series. Oh, this book, I've reread this book so many times. It's epistolary. Chris, there was the whole thing with my one true Chris, because there was like Chris Pratt and Chris Evans and all the different actors named Chris. This is my one true Chris. I love Chris. Of course, I have the one with the step back, and this is his and Beatrix book, and just thinking about it makes me want to reread this. I love this. I love their connection, and when she sends him this letter that she doesn't mean to send, but it's just like, please find me. And then he ends up finding her, and they have this connection. I love this book. I love Lisa Kleypas, but this book just touches me every single time I read it. So if you have not gotten to the Hathaway series, where are you? What are you doing? get to the Hathaways right away. All of the books are phenomenal in that series. It starts out with Mine Till Midnight, which is a banger. And then it ends on this majesticness that, now I want to reread this book and that whole series, guys. Oh, okay. So on to our final letter. We have E. And I'm going to give it to Eternal Darkness by Stacy Reid. This is the first book in her Amagarians series. This is actually the first book I read from her. I read her paranormal fantasy series first, and then I realized she did historical romance and jumped onto that. I loved this series. I saw there is one book that I never saw came out that I still have to read for it. But I mean, Stacy Reid is an amazing author, and I saw on a live show recently that she did with Jen from the Book Refuge. I'll go ahead and pop it up here if you haven't seen it. She does mention that she has plans for other fantasy and paranormal books in her brain. Whether we'll ever get to see them, I don't know, but I certainly hope so. I love her writing. She has phenomenal historical romance books, but I had to throw it to this over the historical romances because this was the first book I read from her, and this started my Stacy Reid love. Plus I go by Stacy, so it's always fun to have another Stacy I can rep, and I just love her to pieces, and I hope that everything going on with her health starts kind of getting better. And I know she's going through family stuff, but I love her to pieces. I love her books. She seems like just the sweetest person, and I had to throw Stacy Reid on here. I just had to, because it's like a name rec thing, right? I had to throw a Stacy on my name rec name, right? So yeah, I loved it, and there we go. There are the recs for my name. I had a lot of fun, and it was kind of hard to try to figure out which ones. I definitely had some culling I had to do, but it was kind of excited to go back, especially to some of these books that it's been a while, and think about them again. And I've been wanting to reread a couple of favorite series of mine, but my reread my reread TBR just got a lot longer, because it's been a while since I read some of these books, and it'd be interesting to come back to them and see if I still would give them 5 stars. Like I mentioned, all of the books that I had here, I gave 5 stars. Some of them back in 2015 when I started at Goodreads. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And some of these I read before that, but I added to my Goodreads when I created my Goodreads. So yeah, there's that. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to leave me a comment down below, let me know which of these recs you're most intrigued by, if you haven't heard of them before, or if you've done a similar thing, either whether it's on a blog post, an Instagram post, you did a video yourself, let me know. I definitely would love to check it out, because always looking for more book recs. And if you'd rather just leave me an emoji, leave me an apple emoji for my last name. But otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all soon with another video.